Hi, and welcome back to One Decision. We are here at the Warsaw Security Conference. I'm Christina Ruffini, and I'm here with my co-host, Sir Richard Dearlove, and our current honored guest is General Ben Hodges, who is Commander of U.S. Army Europe and has done so many other things. I will let you speak about them too a little bit. But you've been here, you're one of the speakers at the conference here. What is the issue that everybody's talking about? What is the thing you're being asked about the most?
Well, of course, the drone activity over Denmark is in the front of everybody's mind, as well as last week's Russian drone operation against Poland.
Of course.
And then the Russian Air Force operation in Estonia. You know, these are the things, and I don't think people are confused anymore about who the bad guy is or who the aggressor is, but they still are not sure what to do about it. And you've got a full range of, shoot everything down to, let's don't overreact. And
well, that's one of the things we've been talking about is he testing security responses, or is he testing the alliance, or both? Is he doing exactly what you just said, dividing by having people react differently and want to respond differently?
I don't think those are exclusive. There's no doubt they're probing to see what reaction times, how do we react, levels of readiness. That would be a part of it. But the part that is more dangerous is the keeping people on edge. People are worried, and the Russians are showing that they get to decide when we work. You've got this big EU summit happening in Denmark this week, but airspace is being turned on and off because of these drones. So the Russians are in effect saying, we decide when you meet. Yeah. And so this is this power leverage. And then, of course, while this is all going on, you still got 3 Shadow Fleet oil tankers a day heading out of the Baltic Sea, right past not only Baltic countries, but Finland, Poland, Germany, Denmark, Sweden. So this is all part of an effort to keep us off balance.
But there's also a theory that I was reading about recently, and I've discussed it with others, that this is also, a classic Putin distraction, because things in Ukraine may not be going quite as the Russians would like. And in fact, there's an argument to say that they're in a fragile position economically. They may be at peak performance in Ukraine now, and the slope is downward. And the Russians have always been brilliant at opening up another issue, making you turn your attention to that, whilst the main subject, which is the war in Ukraine, ain't going quite so well as they hope. I don't know whether you agree with that. I'm not sort of putting that forward necessarily as my theory, but I've had it put to me quite seriously.
Well, the way you said it is even better than I could have said it. I think that's exactly right, that Russia, after 11 and a half years of war, and, going to keep emphasizing this war started back in 2014.
Yeah.
So after 11 and a half years of war, Russia still only controls about 20% of Ukraine. The Great Black Sea Fleet, gone. The Great Russian Air Force failed its main task of air superiority and interdiction, not at all. The Army has barely gained any meaningful ground over the past almost 2 years, year and a half, at enormous cost. So the only thing the Russians can do, and will keep doing, is killing innocent civilians with their hundreds of drones every night on Ukrainian cities. But they're not going to quit just because the Ukrainians kill a lot of Russian troops. They only will quit when they realize that they can't win and that the West commits to helping Ukraine actually win, not this we're with you for as long as it takes nonsense. So I think on the ground, while it sucks to be a Ukrainian soldier sitting in a trench in Pokrovsk, the fact is they have stopped the Russians, and the Russians don't have the ability, like their grandfathers did, to overrun, break through, exploit. That doesn't exist.
But the other thing that worries me is that we're teaching the Russians in this war how to fight a conventional war, which they were clearly really ill prepared for when they started this in 2014. So in a way, there's a sort of irony behind the conflict, because you're making the Russian military more effective over time. The longer the war goes on, that worries me as well.
That's not a take that I had before. I don't know if I'd see like we're helping them learn how to do it.
Maybe you have a judgment on that which outweighs anything that we can offer.
I also really enjoy it when people tell Sir Richard he's wrong, so you feel free to say whatever you're feeling right now.
I didn't have his take on it. How's that?
Good to tell he's worked in political spheres.
Well,
but
look,
yes.
The fact is, Russia's economy, I do subscribe to the theory that their economy is in deep trouble. Ukrainians have put their finger right on the bruise that is Russia's vulnerability. It's oil and gas infrastructure. I mean, if they cannot export oil, I'm not talking about gasoline for Russians, but I'm happy to see long lines at Russian gas stations. But if they cannot export oil to India, China, Turkey, and others, then they cannot sustain this war past next year. So continuing to hit that. And it's interesting that, and you would know this from your professional background, Russia's great strength over the centuries was its vastness. I mean, no invading.
Just a numbers game.
The distances, the czars, Stalin, everybody could always just kind of keep withdrawing, and allow the invader to overextend and be swallowed up. Now, that vastness is a vulnerability because they cannot possibly protect all of the infrastructure. The Ukrainians, of course, know this better than anybody. They now have weapons that they are making that can reach all the way to terminals for export. They just don't have enough with the big warhead on them yet. So this is where we could help. The point is, the Ukrainians have made it clear that that there's no part of Russia that cannot be touched. And so this vastness is a vulnerability. So they're constantly having to decide, where do I put my air defense? Do I defend logistics sites, transport, oil refineries, barracks, whatever?
You said that the U.S. and Europe have got to stop holding back and give Ukraine what it really needs to win this war, be all in. You just mentioned it a little bit, but what do they need that they don't have? Where does it need to come from, and how does that happen? Well,
as President Zelensky said this morning, the most important thing that the West could contribute would be a statement that we want Ukraine to win. We want Ukraine to be able to regain all of its sovereign territory, 1991 borders. That's our objective because it's in our interest, ours.
But President Trump mostly said that, which was quite a sea change. So I'd like your take on that, but continue. We can come back to it.
Yeah, let me come back to that.
Yeah.
So for sure, it starts with, what is our strategic objective? What do we want to have? What do we want it to look like when this is all over? And no administration, the Biden administration, Trump administration, has never done that. And frankly, I haven't heard that from most European governments either.
No,
okay,
that's
to
true.
say we want Ukraine to win, and this is how it should look like. Instead, it's we want to have a better negotiating position. So the second thing, though, I think that Ukraine needs is a commitment to deliver long-range precision strike capability. That's how you defeat Russian mass, is with precision. Is you take out headquarters, you take out logistics, you take out oil and gas infrastructure. Without those things, it doesn't matter how many tens of thousands of unlucky privates they have out there on the steppes.
They still don't have that, right? I mean, they have Patriots, but they have to use them in defensive capability. Is that still the rule? What are
There's still a limit on the missiles that.
Yeah, to be honest, this
being
administration has not been very clear. It's not certain what they are actually allowing or what they see and then what happens in reality. So it's absolutely not open-ended. And there's some, let's just say there's friction inside the Department of Defense between what one's saying and what the other's saying.
I've heard a suggestion also, and I think it's quite controversial, that America could supply certain bits of kit like Warthogs, which could change the infantry battlefield and make the A-10s
Right.
because there's a ton of them sitting in a desert in Arizona, completely unused apparently. I mean, is anything like that really practical or not?
Well, first of all, we have consistently underestimated Ukraine's ability to take something and get the most out of it.
Yeah, amazing.
I mean, I remember in 2015 when I was still the commander of U.S. Army Europe, and the Obama administration made the decision to provide the Q-36 radar to the Ukrainians. There was still no lethal aid, but this radar is a counter-fire radar. It's intended to detect incoming rockets, artillery, etc. And so it provides early warning, obviously, but it also provides the location, the point of origin.
Exactly.
So you can shoot back.
You can shoot back, yeah.
Right, that's it. And I mean, I was very familiar with this. This is old kit. What we discovered, it's much better than I ever knew. We put it in the hands of the Ukrainians, and they figured out how to really exploit that. And I had no idea. Of course, I've never been under Russian artillery fire. They are very good at it. But this has been true of everything else we've given them. Now, to provide A-10s, for example, every infantry soldier loves A-10s because of what it does.
Yeah.
But to be honest, that would be a policy decision. And I'm going to sound a little bit like a scratched record. I would much rather see us say we want Ukraine to win, and we're going to give them every capability they need to win. If that means A-10s, great. But you know what? A-10 is not self-sustaining. There's always a huge maintenance package that comes with these things. They go through a lot of ammunition, so it's not. It's a platform.
I appreciate it's really complicated. But I mean, if you talk to some of the MOD in London military analysts, I mean, they do say that sort of Russian military performance is pretty much peaked, and that they're heading for great difficulties. So, I mean, there is an argument now for saying if we can sustain and improve the armaments that the Ukrainians have, that you really could see a change on the battlefield.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Of course you know, and most of your listeners know, that soldiers and units and pilots, they don't just pop out of a box. I mean, you've got to bring them in, you have to train, build up, and you have this, what we call the institutional army, which is responsible for recruiting and training and equipping, and then taking civilians and putting them into operational fighting force. So that takes a lot of time, and Russia's institutional army has been shredded. They don't have a lot of experienced sergeants and officers still around. The famous Russian airborne division, which is, most Ukrainians say they were always the elite of the elite. They're like on their third generation of people. The only thing that's still there is the shoulder patch. They've been wiped out 3 times. Same with the Russian Marines. So you can't just sustain that level of capability. You have to replenish it. And when you think of the casualties they've had, who's going to train all the new troops? It's more than just having bodies available for the meat grinder. So to answer your question, yes, again, if we made the decision or recognized it's in our interest, all of Europe, US, UK, Canada, that Ukraine wins and Russia is defeated and forced to live inside their own borders, it would be worth every penny, and not one American or British soldier would have been killed in the process.
But do you think you're getting any closer to that, given, we've had people say that the U.S. president says a lot of things and they're going to wait for the policy, but it does seem like these recent remarks from Trump saying he's convinced now that Ukraine could win this war. Do you think that helps European nations say the thing that you want them to say? We will back you and we will do what? And do you think that could have its own momentum, or is it still, we're still not there yet? You think it's still a mental obstacle to overcome to make that kind of commitment?
It's about 1 million times better than that awful meeting in the Oval Office back in February when he said you got no cards. I mean, clearly the administration had no idea of what war is about, why people fight, to say that Ukrainians had no cards. I mean, they really were out of touch with the reality there. So now, if the president says, oh, I think Ukraine can win and get all their territory back, that's 1,000,000 times better. Now, what I really heard when he said all that was the administration washing their hands because he said Ukraine can do this and the European Union should help. Well, of course, the U.S. is not in the EU. You know, this is, and even within 12 hours, both Secretary Rubio and Secretary Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, were making statements that kind of were walking this back a little bit. So, you know, in a normal time when the president said something, you know, you could, okay, this signals new policy. I don't have that sense here. But even President Zelensky, when he was asked about that, he says, well, okay, whether or not the president means it or follows through with it, maybe this makes it easier for Republicans in Congress to be more outspoken in their support, that at least they're freed up.
But if things go badly for the Russians, I mean, if they do start to lose, and do you think there's a risk of a battlefield, a tactical nuclear weapon being used?
Well, of course, I would never say zero because Russia has thousands of nuclear warheads, and they don't care how many innocent people they kill, including their own. So it would not be a moral decision for them not to use a nuclear weapon. But there is zero positive outcome for Russia if they use a tactical nuclear weapon.
I agree with that.
I mean, it won't achieve anything that helps their cause. It will only make it more difficult for China and others to continue to support them. So I've always been very doubtful that they would do this, but they saw that U.S. administration and some European governments were terrified of this possibility, and especially the last administration. And so they were very concerned that that they might do that. And so the Russians would send Medvedev out once a week, you know, in a drunken stupor. We're going to do a big nuclear exercise in Belarus.
I was asked about Medvedev recently because he hasn't really been a thing in a while, and he kind of like resurfaced and had this Twitter spat with Trump. And I literally said, like, this is the guy who's best known for like sending out drunk social media messages from some hole in Moscow. But it is very funny that he's back out again. I had completely forgot. Last time I saw Medvedev was at a G20 in Naypyidaw, Burma, with Obama. They have these white elephants there, and they're like literally white elephants. You go visit them, and he was wearing skinny jeans and Vans and a Hawaiian shirt and Ray-Bans and chain smoking. And we said, Mr. President, how are the elephants? Very nice, very nice. And this is the guy. But like, what is your assessment in general? Because we've talked around it a lot, but I'm curious to know if this is a war of attrition, and we're talking about Russian capabilities degrading versus Ukrainian capabilities degrading. You've said Ukraine is at the risk of exhaustion and getting, you know, a bit fatigued. What are your assessments of these two militaries at this time? Can they both keep going? Who has the upper hand?
Well, I think you could not find 5 Russian soldiers that want to be in Ukraine. I mean, they're not there because they're defending Mother Russia or their families. Every Ukrainian soldier is there defending, you know, literally their grandmother lives in a village behind them somewhere. We know from history that war is a test of will as much as it is a test of logistics. And clearly the Ukrainians have the superior will to the Russians. It remains to be seen, our leadership, does it have superior will to Vladimir Putin? Now, there's been a lot of talk about why Ukrainians, you know, they got to lower their draft age, they got to do this. I actually, I've changed my thinking about this as well. They need a strong defense industry and all that stuff as much as they need brigades. And the way the war is right now, if they can continue to produce and improve their own defense industry, their long-range strike capability and counter-drone and do these things, I think they're smart not to put as many people out into the kill zone as possible. On the other hand, I would also say the government still has the responsibility to earn the confidence of Ukrainian families that their son or daughter or brother or sister or whoever, if they do decide to join or if they are conscripted, that they will not be sent into combat until they have been properly trained, properly equipped, and get put into a unit that is ready to go. So that's a contract that the government has, and I think right now you still got a lot of Ukrainian families remember the old prison armies of the Cold War days. Secondly, I think that they have failed, no, they have not yet made the decision to look at the tens of thousands of women that want to fight. I mean, they still have yes, there are thousands of Ukrainian women in uniform, but they still tend to be in traditional roles versus being out there killing Russians. And I think, U.S. Army, 20% female. We did that because we had to. And also we discovered that, they're much better than men are at most things that you need to do in combat anyway. I'm not throwing a bouquet to anybody, it's a fact. And so I think Ukrainians are going to have to address that.
I covered the start of the war here from Poland and was watching these Ukrainian women come across the border, having walked 30 kilometers in the middle of the night, hauling 2 kids, dogs, suitcases, just absolutely indefatigable. I remember I said to one woman, are you okay? What are you doing? Do you know what you're going to do? She said, what do you mean? I'm going to move forward. This is what I'm going to do. And I have to say, I would not want to come up against any of those women on a front line. They are a fierce force to be reckoned with. Yeah.
You mentioned, and of course we all agree, war is logistics as well. How optimistic are you about the sort of coordination of European arms production? I mean, you've got some amazing developments like, the stocks of artillery shells and things like that, which are being built up at speed. You've got production of Patriots in Germany, but there is a necessary issue of coordinating and focusing that production, particularly with regard to supplying Ukraine.
Well, it boils down to requirements and strategic objective. What is the objective? And I think more and more European leaders are realizing and saying that the best way to make sure that Europe is never involved in a war or that NATO is never involved in a war with Russia is to help Ukraine defeat NATO. So, the idea of producing capabilities that you give to Ukraine is a better investment than, if you have to choose, than just stockpiling ammunition for yourself. That's one thing. Second thing, I think that European countries are more and more cooperating in exactly what you're talking about in providing certain things. I don't know that it's obviously not exactly where it should be yet. And we're at a place now we should have been at least 2 years ago.
The other crucial issue is American intelligence of the battlefield, supplied from Wiesbaden to the Ukrainian army. I mean, it seems, okay, that was cut briefly under Trump, I seem to understand. There was that 8-day hiatus or a 10-day hiatus. But in my view, there's nobody who can really replicate that for the Ukrainians, given the sophistication of your coverage. I mean, and obviously my background, I do understand something about the logistics of that.
You would know much better than me, but in my view, Europe, our allies, not just Ukraine, but our allies, should not assume that the U.S. will always be there to provide that. I mean, as we've seen, it can be turned off, and at least by this administration. Now, we're going to regret this forever, but that's a fact. And so I am hearing of some countries are starting to look for ways to plug that gap in U.S. capability. But I'm a little embarrassed to tell this story on myself, but it's revealing. I went to Estonia for the first time in 2015, and or maybe late 14. It was not too long after Russia had invaded Ukraine, seized Crimea and all that. And the chief of defense said, "Ben, I'd like you to take a briefing from my chief of intelligence." I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." Of course, I'm an American. I'm thinking, the sky's full of American satellites and blah, blah, blah. And Kalpo, is a lieutenant colonel, he starts talking about what they saw, what they heard, how the Russians did all this. And I'm like, holy hell, how does he know all this, you know? And they're not Five Eyes and blah, blah, blah. And finally, after it was over, it was the best intelligence briefing I had ever received. I said, how do you know all that? And he looked at me and said, well, sure, we live here. And we all can speak Russian. We know who all these guys are. We read everything they write and what they say. We know it. And I was like, man, just because they're not Five Eye and don't have 1,000 satellites doesn't mean they don't know what's going on. And so the real magic is not American satellites. It's the intelligence sharing, the trust that U.S., UK, Estonia, and all the others have had over the years. That's what's got to be protected. And I think hopefully, even in the current U.S. administration, that there's somebody there that's smart enough to say, we'll be screwing ourselves if we withdraw from that intelligence sharing, or if our allies lose trust in us.
We have the Estonian defense minister tomorrow, so I'll be sure to relay that story. I know you've got a bus to catch. I want to let you go, but before I do have to ask you your impression, your take, your opinion of this all-hands meeting that's being called for these American generals. They're all meeting on a base in Quantico, Virginia, to get a speech from the Secretary of Defense, or I guess it's the Secretary of War now, on warrior ethos, something like that. And now we hear Trump. You were just telling me Trump is going to be there as well. Have you ever heard anything like this, and how do you feel?
Well, first of all, it's still the Department of Defense. Until the Congress changes the law, they can't just arbitrarily do that. So I would stick with Department of Defense. And of course, the Secretary of Defense has the authority to summon commanders. So this is not illegal. I just think it's an absolutely terrible idea and a needless waste of resources and time. You know, throughout the years in Afghanistan and Iraq and everything else we've done, we've had secure conference calls. We got $1 gazillion worth of stuff.
Yeah, can't they just zoom them into this meeting?
Of course you have this ability, but this is not what they're after. I think this is the Secretary of Defense, and now the President, as of yesterday at least, is when I heard that he had made the decision he was going to attend. This is about theater. I think they want to show that, yes, finally we don't have this woke military anymore. Now we're serious war fighters, and it's going to cover those types of topics. I don't know. I don't think he's going to lay out, and here's our strategy, and those kind of things, or a new focus, other than probably some emphasizing more Western Hemisphere versus endless wars. What I worry about more than anything is that it's going to be turned into a pep rally where you've got officers are confronted with the possibility of something that looks like a MAGA pep rally. And I'm hoping that they are all able to sit there like, Mount Rushmore and be professional, applause when it's appropriate, as you always would to the Commander-in-Chief. I hope we don't get something where it looks like a North Korean, everybody reacting like North Korean officers do. I think this is going to be a test.
Can I conclude with a story about American warriors? The last time I saw President Bush, he invited me to breakfast in Dallas. This was after he left office. And he presented me at breakfast with a signed copy of a book with 50 portraits of American warriors that he himself had painted in his studio. And I think that's an amazing celebration of American and military accomplishment. And I mean, it's a remarkable thing for a former president to have done. And he's a really good painter.
We'll see what kind of picture this event paints after.
Well, if the president comes out with his red MAGA hat and that room is full of flags and they got the music going, that will be the first indicator of what kind of event.
But don't you think that's likely? I mean, we've already seen that at some events with the military behind
Well,
it, because I've covered these events for years,
is
and
why
I
I'm
know
worried.
that they used to be not allowed to clap and not allowed to be behind the political event.
This is this terrible thing that happened at Fort Bragg back in June.
Yeah.
The president was there. I mean, and they set it up to be a big political rally. And the president of the United States is talking terribly about governors and all that. And it created an atmosphere that was entirely inappropriate. And the leadership of the Army let this get away from them. They should have known better. Now they absolutely have no excuse for not knowing what to expect. And I hope that they will maintain the trust of the American people by demonstrating that their oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Of course, the president's commander-in-chief, but the Congress also has responsibilities. I mean, the Army is not the president's personal army. And so that's why the idea of an oath, personal oath to the president, has such a un-American, undemocratic, unhealthy feeling to it. No other president ever felt he needed that. So.
All right, we'll have to see. I know we got to let you go. General, thank you so much for taking the time. I could have stayed here all day. I really appreciate it.